that anger does, not only does it rob us of our joy, it basically makes us ineffective to do the exact opposite of what was done to us. Think about that for a second. It makes us unable to change the path and from what we've experienced to what we now do. That's how big anger is, guys. That's how big it is. And so we stand with a choice. And I've talked a lot about anger because I believe that is the core, that is where it begins. But ultimately, as I talk about this trip now, this trip that we're taking along this path, now is where the fork meets the road. And we really have two choices. One choice is to forgive. We can acknowledge what's happened in our lives to us, or maybe the things that we have done, we can forgive. We can choose to forgive in response to God's grace, or the second option is that we can continue and begin to move down that path of bitterness, and resentment. But the scriptures tell us not to allow sin and the anger to control us. That if we wallow in bitterness and resentment, then that moves us down a path that we don't want to go. And let me talk specifically about bitterness for just a moment, and what it means to allow that anger to fester and to build up. Because a lot of us have walked in here with some significant hurts that have happened to us, some significant things that we have done. And so we're standing here and I can say, guys, we need to forgive. Well, man, that sure sounds easy, but it's very difficult. But let me tell you what happens if we don't. You guys saw the Spider-Man 3 clip, and that picture of that black stuff kind of taking him over. I really believe that's true. Now, we don't physically see it, but what happens is we start walking around and we start carrying our baggage, and we don't even know we're carrying it. And it becomes hard to move around, and it's hard to walk, and it's hard to have joy because, man, this stuff's heavy. It's hard to carry this around. I'm getting tired of carrying it around. And at some point, though, we don't even realize we're carrying it, and we just kind of get used to the limp. And we just walk around. We don't even know why we don't have joy anymore, or why we're not happy, or why things are so difficult for us, but it just is, and then we get madder. Amen. Thank you. You do. You get madder because, man, what's going on? Why is this so hard? Well, guys, we got to deal with the core. We got to go deeper. We got to start hitting down to the very core of what created that anger. And I believe that choice that we make, that moment that we make the choice to go one side or the other on that road, the road of forgiveness or road of bitterness, is so significant. So what does the road to bitterness look like? Well, we start to justify our anger because we were rightfully wronged. Genuinely, we were wronged. Someone did wrong to us, and it's okay for us to be mad. That's what we tell ourselves. It's okay to be angry and it's a righteous anger because we were innocent and they hurt us and da-da-da-da-da. And I got to tell you guys, I don't believe that's what God tells us. I think that's a lie. And you're right that it was not okay. But guys, we're so wrong when we begin to justify our anger in response to that. And ultimately, as I mentioned before, I believe one of God's great purposes for us is to experience joy-filled lives. But bitterness and resentment ultimately and completely rob joy from our lives. It robs us. Not only does it rob joy from our lives, it robs our ability to be effectively different than what we've experienced. And so forgiveness. This is the other path. And first of all, I want to ask the question, why should we forgive? Why should we forgive those who've hurt us? The first reason is because we've been forgiven. I remember Dean Keast, who is my college pastor in Arizona, and I was riding to Mexico on a church van to build homes for people in need. And there were about 100 of us, 150 of us. And as we're driving down, Dean turns to me and said, you know what, I heard a guy say a quote the other day that I think is so profound and so real. And he said, there is absolutely no sin which I am not personally capable of committing. And immediately in my head, I thought, dude, you are nuts. There are some things that I would absolutely never, ever do. There's no possible way I could do some horrible things. And then Dean turned to me and said, you know what? I'm not going to go out and kill anybody right now. But I understand that my heart is such that if I allow myself to go down a certain road, I really am capable of some pretty difficult things, some pretty horrible things. And yeah, I'm not a murderer, or I'm not an abuser, but I'm capable. And just that capability is a reality that we all have to kind of stand and admit. if we allow ourselves to go down a certain road. And the reason I bring this up is because, guys, I really think it's important that we stand on an equal playing field when we understand our need for grace. That every single one of us is in the same boat. We all carry around baggage. Now, the baggage is a little different, but we all carry it. And we all need someone to take it away. We all need Jesus. We all need forgiveness. And I believe that the forgiveness that we experience through Christ compels us to deny anger and allowing anger to create bitterness and resentment. 2 Corinthians says this, when you forgive this man, Paul is talking, I forgive him too. And when I forgive whatever needs to be forgiven, I do so with Christ's authority for your benefit, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. Guys, when we forgive, we are basically extending the grace of God. Remember I mentioned before righteous anger? That is where we extend a movement of the grace of God. I believe God's called us to do that. So the first reason that we forgive is because we need forgiveness ourselves. The second reason is because we need to forgive to experience God's joy in our lives. We need to forgive in order to experience God's joy for our lives. As we forgive, it's almost as though all of this baggage that we're carrying around, the hurts that we've experienced, the anger that we've allowed to kind of just grab a hold of us, that's become bitterness and resentment. Guys, we get to let it go. We get to drop it. In fact, what's cool is that no one else even has to carry it. It's gone. We get to walk in freedom. We get to walk in joy. And again, guys, it's not the fairy pixie joy. I mean, it's an inexpressible joy. It's a joy deep down in our identity, knowing we are secure, knowing that we are strong. I mentioned before, guys, that I was angry because I thought it gave me strength. There is no greater strength in the world than knowing your identity as a child of God. Knowing who I am allows me to walk through anything. There's no greater strength. And that joy that comes when we finally let go and we truly forgive, guys, it's an inexpressible joy. The third reason is because it allows us to be effective in life and the purposes for which we've been created. I mentioned before that man's anger will not change us, but a righteous anger brings about the movement of the grace of God. When that righteous anger and that compassion wells up inside of us, and we see a hurting child, we can effectively minister the grace of God to that child. But if we're holding on to unforgiveness, guys, we're not giving them the grace of God. You guys see what I'm saying here? It's so important. Now, I mentioned before that this is a hard teaching. Now it gets even harder. This is where I'm going to really challenge every one of us. And that is this. We have to come to a point to experience the grace of God and the joy that He's created for us. We have to actually choose to forgive. I've sat with so many people and prayed with them and ministered to them and talked to them and listened to them. And at some point, when we come to the point of forgiving, they will say this: Dear God, I pray that you will help me to forgive this person. And guys, I got to tell you, it is a noble prayer. It is a noble prayer, but it's not forgiveness.